Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see people interested in free market and Austrian economics. The topic for today is regulation, and officially government regulation in the economy, how much is enough? I think we'll tackle that. First question, I think, is we're confronted in America right now with a problem, a basic problem, namely that, well, one thing is most people feel that they're worse off than they were 10 years ago. They feel that their children are going to be worse off than they are, which is a big change in the American dream, where most people expect to have their children better off than they are, and so each generation improves. And now we're beginning to, they perceive that they're sort of sliding down slowly but surely into an abyss. A lack of consumer confidence, it's called. Well, is that sort of crazy? What's the reasons for it? Well, first place, we're in a deep recession. I'm not here to talk about the recession tonight. That's really another topic. On the top of the recession, after all, there always have been recessions. There have been every 3, 4, 10 years or something. And something else has changed, namely on top of the recession, or through the middle of the recession, there's also a gradual but substantial slowing down, decline of American living standards. So the average person, average income is correcting for inflation, correcting for taxes, is worse off than they were. Since 1973, there's been a slow but steady decline in American incomes, living standards. So that accounts, of course, for the perception of things are getting worse. Good reason for the perception. And you see various aspects of this. Young people can't afford, when they get married, they can't afford a house anymore. They used to be able to afford a house. They could afford a house in the 1950s. How come they can't afford it now? So it's not just a perception. It's of course obviously something going on out there. One of the responses to this, the recession and the decline, etc. One of the, I think, pretty obviously feeble response, but at least in the right direction. In the State of the Union address, President Bush, this January 28th, declared a moratorium on new government regulations. And originally, I think, for 30 days or 60 days, he extended it until about August. It might still be on, I don't really know. But the interesting thing is that that this could consider maybe how do we get out of the recession? How can the government get us out of the recession, or help get us out of the recession, and still not intervene in the economy very much? And one obvious answer was maybe a moratorium on new regulations. Ponder that for a moment. Vice President Quayle, from the Council on Competitiveness, which has done some fairly good work, again, sort of piddling, Congress is trying to defund it because they think it's a terrible thing. They're trying to deregulate it a little bit. And what the Council on Competitiveness has done since the Bush administration began was to change 100 federal regulations. 100, I don't know how many there are, but maybe 100,000 regulations. They managed to change 100 to save the public an estimated $15 to $20 billion annually. Ponder that. These are tight. This is like a frosting on the cake. This is like the tip of the iceberg. And because there are tens of thousands of federal regulations, old ones as well as new ones, and changing a little bit can save the public $20 billion. How much could they save if they eliminated the whole bowl of wax? Okay, the whole shebang. Now, there were 2 bills in Congress. I presume they didn't pass. I really haven't been following the political scene too depressing the last couple of weeks. I haven't followed the latest that Congress left back home. The Nichols-Reed bill, which would require an economic impact statement, an unemployment impact statement for all new federal regulations before they go into effect. It seems fairly reasonable. If you have this regulation, how many people would throw out of work? How much would it cost? Who would suffer? And this, of course, did not pass. But the thing is, what about the old regulation? What about hundreds of thousands of old regulations that are on the books? How about their economic impact and employment impact? How about doing something about that? Well, there's also the Hatch-Cumbest bill, obviously did not pass, which would require a 3-year cap on the total cost of federal regulations. The idea is any new regulations come in, of course they're all coming in all the time, any increase in the cost of the economy of the business of the new regulations should be offset by reducing federal regulatory costs somewhere else. And this, of course, didn't pass either. I mean, really, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a monstrous parasitic burden on the economic system. That's what we're dealing with. And just a little bit shuffling here, and a little bit of reduction could mean $20 billion. You can imagine what would happen, as I say, if the whole thing was eliminated. So we have, I think this is one big reason. There are two, I think, big reasons for the decline of living standards. One is the tremendous increase in the tax burden, federal, state, and local, which keeps siphoning off private savings and private income to government boondoggles, number one. And number two, the tremendous increase in cost of federal regulations and government, state, and local regulations. Government regulations keep increasing. As they increase, they burden the economic system. So what one thing a regulation does, it sort of hits the consumer 5 ways. It's like 4 or 5 ways. I told it out the other day. One thing is the regulation increases costs, obviously, and regulation on businesses, lowers the productivity of the economy. You can't do this because you have to do that. You have to fill out this form there, that sort of thing. Lowers the competitiveness of business abroad, so we can't compete with Japan, Germany, whatever. And causes a decline of living standards for everybody. That's, of course, what we're seeing anyway, decline of living standards. Now, there's a myth among many people, many businessmen, that if you increase the cost of business, either by a tax or by regulation, they just pass it on to the consumer. It's sort of like passing you the check. You know, the waiter gives you the check. That's not the way it works. That in itself would be bad enough if the consumer is loaded on the extra cost. But it doesn't work that way. You can't just pass on the cost to the consumer because there's competition. And there's competition abroad, there's competition with other firms. So what happens, the way the increased costs get passed on to the consumer, not that easy. What happens is firms go out of business, they make losses, and the supply of goods goes down, and prices then go up. So what the costs get passed on in a manner such that businesses get hurt and consumers get hurt. Everybody gets hurt. Not exactly everybody, I'll get to the exception in a minute. So when costs increase, when regulations increase, when taxes on business increase, it hurts businesses, it puts them out of business, they suffer severe losses, it hurts savings, and it also hurts the consumer as production goes down from what it would have been before the cost regulation was imposed. So, but there are, as I said, there are some groups that benefit. Not everybody loses. Because the interesting thing is, if everybody lost by government regulation, why do they still have them? You would think that when people would eventually get wise to the situation and eventually see, well, gee, regulations are crippling the economy, maybe we should cut them down, eliminate them. But there are some groups who benefit by these crippling regulations. These groups, of course, are lobbying for them and pushing and advocating them, and so far have been successful in propaganda. In first place, people who advocate regulations do not say, I want the regulation in order to shaft the public. Okay? I want a regulation because I want to have a monopoly, or I want to restrict entry into my occupation or my business. Because if they said that, they wouldn't get very far. It doesn't fly politically. So I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute of this crazy regulation. I was talking in my class, I gave a lecture in my class last night about regulations, and they all popped up. They're all fairly adult students, and they were entrepreneurs and small businessmen. They knew examples of crazy regulations. They go on and on. It was very interesting because they knew about the Vegas situation in California or whatever. Well, one thing that happens, okay, who benefits? The first place, you impose a regulation, even if the regulation is innocuous, even just filling out forms. Forgetting about the content of the regulation for a minute. You fill out forms, because government means filling out forms. Government means two things: filling out forms and standing in line. That's the essence of government. So when you fill out forms, the small business gets hurt more, even if it's just the same number of forms, more or less. Small business gets hurt much more than big business. If you're General Motors, you can hire an department of form fillers, right? They don't care that much. But if you have a small businessman with 4 or 5 employees, you can't hire full-time form fillers. And so the impact of regulation is tremendously disproportionate on small business. Small business gets crippled, gets put out of business. And so big business competitors realize that that's dumb. Realize that any kind of fixed cost, imposition of fixed costs or more or less fixed costs will cripple their competitors. And means also that small business, the way businesses get big in the United States, mostly, is by growing. You start small, like Polaroid Corporation. You start very small, you grow to a giant corporation if you're efficient at satisfying consumers. Well, if you cripple them at the very beginning, you have regulation, 85 regulation that can fill out before they get started, they'll never grow. And so the big business is content these young upstarts won't come on and outcompete us, won't challenge us in competition. So it's not just that you're small business, it's also small business which could have been big, which could have satisfied consumers better without these regulations. So that's even aside from the content of regulation, there's, let's say, just the fact of filling, form filling. And also, another way in which competition injures the consumer. By the way, Turgot, the great French economist of the late 18th century, was a sort of a pre-Austrian type. There's a wonderful section which could have been written an attack on Ralph Nader, the 1760s. The same sort of junk was going on then as is going on now. Except they didn't really say it was benefiting the consumer then. So the propaganda has gotten slicker. But he points out that the regulation is allegedly designed to protect consumers, lull them to sleep. Okay? In other words, why do the consumer doesn't have to exercise his or her smarts to figure out which doctor to go to, which contract or whatever. The government is a promoter, is a licensed contractor, is a licensed doctor. Therefore, he must be good. And so the government, by putting the imprimatur of the government on each of these occupations, each of these businesses, weaken the acumen of the consumers in learning about what's going on and picking the best people. And so instead of helping the consumer, government regulation weakens them and cripples them in their own learning process, their own competition. As I say, there are several examples of this. Again, I'm sure all of you can document this even more. My brother-in-law, for example, is a photographer in rural Virginia, and he's a good photographer. That's not his profession. He's a printer, and but he can't become a full-time photographer. He doesn't want to get a photographer license because it costs too much. In other words, you have this fixed cost. Well, I don't know what it is, hundreds of dollars per year for a license. He wants to be a part-time photographer. He can't do it because of the license. Of course, the licensing situation is in the hands of the occupation of the business. I suppose the Virginia Board of Photographers or whatever issues licenses. Okay, and what do you have to do to get it? We have to do two things: pay a lot of money, and two, be a quote good moral character unquote. I don't know what privileges photographers become judges of good moral character, become ethicists and preachers or whatever. But at any rate, so the essence of it is he can't. If it costs too much for him to do it, he can't. He's still engaged in illegal photography, but he can't advertise in the paper. He can't be in the yellow pages, which cuts the scope of his market and his income. That's not a terrible thing. I mean, my brother-in-law could this anyway. But the point is, he could be doing a good service for the public. He could be competing with licensed photographers, and they can't do it because of this cartel situation. The whole country is cartelized. The business groups squeezing out possible competitors or actual competitors. One of my students said, when I was talking about this, he said that in California, he was a plumber in California, in Los Angeles area, and he couldn't become a plumber because they had to, in order to become a plumber, you have to fill out 130 different license requirements in different jurisdictions, which of course squeezes out plumbing. Even though it's not that you don't know plumbing, you see, the whole problem, you have to go to plumbing school, a special plumbing school in Los Angeles or whatever. Another example I got was a lady who owned 4 or 5 beauty school, hairdressers, beauty parlors in California, decided to retire to Nevada. Nevada is fairly entrepreneurial compared to many other states. The retired event owned one beauty salon. She couldn't do it because she had to go to a beauty school for 5 years or something in Nevada, because apparently hairdressing is different in Nevada than it is in California. And the thing is, she was licensed not just to be a hairdresser, but to be an owner. Well, why do you have to be licensed to be an owner? That's anyway. These regulations go on and on. One of my pet peeves. This is true. I think of every city in the country has a taxi monopoly of unbelievable sort. In New York City, where I was born and raised, lived most of my life, there were 22,000 taxis on the streets in the 1920s, and it was a booming period and all that. In the 1930s, the Big Depression, of course, one thing is if you're poor, you don't ride around in a taxi very much. The taxi business declined, and it went down from 22,000 to about 11,000, something like, I used to know the exact number, 11,171 in fact. In 1934, 1936, in one period, the taxi industry in New York goes to the city government and says, we need help. And before 1934, in order to be able to own and drive a taxi, you have to have a driver's license, you have to have a car, okay? And that's it. And they had to go get a license for $10. You go down to the taxi commission down in City Hall, and for $10 you get your license, and that's it. You pay the cost of the car, the cost of learning how to drive, and $10. Well, the license, since 1934 until the present day, the City of New York has not issued one single new license. That's it. Licenses were frozen forever, apparently, in 1934. So therefore, how do you buy a cab? You only buy a cab. You have to buy the license for somebody who's willing to get out of the cab business. The license, which originally was $10, is now something like $160,000. And this squeezes out, pushes the supply curve of the economy, say, to the left. It means that the supply of cabs is tremendously restricted. The price goes up. You can't find cabs in New York. You can't find them in rush hour. You can't find them when it's raining. You can't find them with a baseball game going on. You can't find them if you want to go to Brooklyn. You want to go to this place that they don't like. And so you have, and the result of this, by the way, you have black markets in cabs. You have quasi-illegal cabs, illegal cabs, gypsy cabs, quasi-gypsies, the whole insane structure, all due to this cartelization. And this is, I think, and I found out in Las Vegas, which I say is fairly free market oriented locally, there are 2,000 cab licenses, and that's it. They haven't increased it for 10 years, although the city is booming, a population of 17% per year increase, plus all the tourists. So the number of cabs is severely restricted, therefore it's very difficult to get a cab. At any rate, this goes on and on. I'm sure you can all multiply examples of this. And this brings us to another, I think, key point here. In addition to who benefits, the cartelists benefit, and the whole group of regulators, what Irving Kristol calls a new class. The new class benefits. The guys who do the regulating. The guys who fill out the forms, or order you to fill out the forms. The counselors, and technocrats, and engineers, and planners, and city planners, and therapists. Sometimes leave out the therapists. The brainwash you if you don't like this whole setup. Send you to sensitivity training, okay? All this whole crew of people who are multiplying like locusts, they benefit. They're what we have in the whole system here. We have a productive sector, a private sector, which I call a productive sector, which is actually producing goods and services, and leeching off them are the public sector, bureaucrats, politicians, all the rest of it. What you have is a tremendous increase in the public sector, a decrease in the private sector. So people leave the private sector and go to the parasitic sector. And what's the result? In the long run, the result, of course, is death for the host and the parasite. The long run result is what happened with communism. He had a communist system in Russia and rest of Eastern Europe, supposedly impregnable, totalitarian, brainwashing everybody. Almost everybody is now in the upper managing class. Almost nobody's doing any producing, and suddenly, bingo, the whole thing collapses. And of course, everything is chaotic. So I hope we don't have to reach that point, okay, and the whole system just dies out. And if we wake up in time, I hope we presumably will not reach that point. But the point is, if you have a productive group, you have a parasitic group, as the parasites that wax greater and greater and more stronger and stronger, and the host begins to decline, the result is inevitable. The result is first of all decay, as we have now. So one of the questions that was asked, of course, what do we do with all these bureaucrats and therapists and planners and all that? We eliminate all this stuff. What do we do with them? My favorite answer to that is that of Howard Jarvis, who was the heroic leader of the Proposition 13 movement in California in 1978. And by the way, if you want to be optimistic, one reason I tend to be optimistic, even though it's a gloomy topic, I happened to be living in California during that year, 1978. It was a heartwarming experience because everybody was attacking this thing. It was, of course, this decline in property taxes by 2/3. Everybody attacked the entire establishment, economists, PTAs, teachers' unions, government officials, newspapers, big business. I mean, if you look at the list of unions, if you look at the list of contributors, big contributors to the anti-Prop 13, every big corporation in California contributed to it. If you look at the list of those businesses contributed for Proposition 30, you never heard of them. Little, holiday spas and something like that. I mean, just a blip on the screen. And so everybody was attacking it, and the establishment of the political parties, everybody. And the thrilling thing was, as the time approached for the originally the polls were 70% against that sort of stuff. As the time approached for the vote, you could see the swing going toward Proposition 13, and the establishment went just bananas. If you pass this, the streets will disappear, the fire department will disappear, the police will disappear, all local government will die, and you die in the street, there won't be any doctors left. Total hysteria, and yet it won. It won by a huge percent, maybe 60%. It was magnificent. Everybody was against it except the public. The public rose up and passed it. Just great. Of course, they were trying to get around it and all sorts of finagling, but the thing is that here was a heroic moment when the public actually rose up and did something about it. And against the entire establishment blockade, there were 2 or 3 economists who signed, maybe more than one, signed petitions for it. I think I was one of them. But anyway, that was just a magnificent demonstration. I remember I spoke at a rally the night before the Proposition 13 vote. It was a rally in Berkeley somewhere, and there was almost nobody there. It was a big baseball park, 50 people there. I was pretty depressed. There was 50 people, and the organizer said, "Don't worry about it. Our people don't go to rallies. They just go and vote." Sure enough, that's what happened. So. My favorite answer to the question, what do you do about these people who will thrown out of work, these bureaucrats and planners and therapists and counselors? And Howard Jarvis, my favorite answer, he said, well, in that case, all these wonderful people will be set free to find productive jobs in the private sector. So that, I think, is the answer to that. And in fact, Yuri Moltsev was my favorite Soviet defector. He defected just before the Iron Curtain fell, in the fall of 1989. He was one of the top economists in Russia. He took a boat across the Gulf of Sweden or whatever it is, and fled from the KGB. So and just after that, like 2 weeks later, they opened the borders. At any rate, he said, well, what do you do with all these people? He said, well, look, what do you do with the KGB? There's a couple of million KGB people in Russia, ex-KGB. What do you do? Well, then they make good private guards, things like that. Security, checking security in factories and like that. So, some kind of related skill. I don't know what it is. So that's, I think, the answer to how much regulation is too much is the whole ball of wax should be eliminated. How fast you do it, I guess, well, first of all, how fast can you do it? Try and practice. We haven't got a magic button we can push and eliminate the whole business. I would push the button. It was there. That's my temperament. Other people might want to give it a couple of weeks. Phase it out. A couple of weeks. But anyway, the basic answer, I think, is pretty clear. Get rid of this stuff. And the more you can get rid of it, the better. The more you can start paring away this tremendous network of crippling regulations, the better. But nobody ever talks about it. I mean, the media doesn't talk about it, of course. And we understand about that. If they hear about regulations, they're all supposed to be for their benefit. You can't get a photographer and a part-time photographer over in rural Virginia because you're being protected in some obscure fashion. So, but I think we need, of course, a lot of education for the public to realize what's going on. I still think the public basically is sound on all this, and they've been conned. They've been conned because, and one of the reasons they've been conned, one of the reasons they've gotten away with is because the media and the intellectual elite, not just the cultural elite, the the intellectual elite, academics, beloved columnists, all the rest of it, network news programs. All these people are part of the new class. They're the same group. So naturally they have their affinities in the class. They have the same ideology. And that's why we don't hear about it. The media curtain or filter through which all these things will have to pass before it gets to the general public. What can be done about that, I'm not quite sure. I'm ready for suggestions to be done about the media. At any rate, I haven't got the answer to all questions. This is the answer to regulation questions, abolish them. How do we go about it? It's like for all of us. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
We'd now like to open the floor to any questions that anybody has for Dr. Rothbard. We'll entertain a few minutes of questions, then I have a few closing comments. Also, Dr. Rothbard has graciously consented to stay around for a little while afterward in case some people had mentioned to me about autographing books and things like this, and we'll just stay around for a few minutes after the formal closing of the first session tonight. But do we have any questions now that you might want to propose to Dr. Rothbard that he can answer? Oh, you feel better if you can.
Yes.
I have one, but before I ask it, I wanted to tell you I was in Alaska last month, and the salmon fisherman I met either said that his license to fish for salmon cost $40,000 or was worth $40,000.
Wow.
And I remember that in conjunction with what I said. My question is apart from regulation. How is the indebtedness of our society going to work itself out?
Public debt.
Public and private.
Well, the private debts, of course, that's a separate topic, separate lecture topic. At any rate, the private debt is being washed out in a sense by the recession. Private debt is, what happened was that during the 1980s, very much like 1920s, the bank credit expansion fueled by the Federal Reserve System poured in expanded bank credit and led to cheap credit, led to malinvestments, bad investments, lousy loans to shopping malls in Texas that don't exist, and things like that. And we're paying the price for that. So corporations and individuals got sucked into debt and banks because of the Federal Reserve System was fueling this, was pumping more credit and more money into the system. It's being washed out by the recession, by restricting their income, by having to pay back. Unfortunately, the debt has not been paid off as much as you'd think, because even though corporations and individuals are going down the debt, paying it off, their assets are going down faster. Many corporations, especially those with real estate, their assets are deflating faster than paying off the debt. So the ratio of debt to assets is going up. That's why it's going to take a long time to get out of the recession, I think. Already a long time. Anyway, the process of private debt can be counteracted by this kind of, by simply the natural forces of the market. Because people can't, the government can print money, but we can't. The government can print money to pay off their debts, and we can't, so we have to tighten our belts. One of the reasons, by the way, why the Federal Reserve driving down interest rates is not working is because people don't want to borrow anymore. They want to pay off their existing debt. So it's not going to work. It's not going to hike the horse until that is paid off. All it's doing now is stimulating the banks purchasing government bonds, what we don't need. So the public debt is much more difficult, but the public debt is unproductive. At least private debt goes into something. Maybe shopping malls that don't exist. The government debt goes into Zippo. It's dissipated. So, and of course pile up tremendously. And but the government has an out. They don't have to, either we pay off their debt, be the taxpayer, or they print money, basically, and inflate the debt away, which is what the Germans did in 1923. Either way, it's a terrible situation. So there's no magic elixir for the public debt. I mean, it's in a sense, I think the public debt is very important, but it's worse. There's one thing worse than the public debt, and that's increasing taxes to try to pay it off. Because increasing taxes make the recession even worse. It siphons away even more savings, et cetera. So the way, of course, for anybody to pay off their debt is to cut expenditure. The way for the government to pay off their debt or reduce it is to stop spending and cut their expense. I mean, my favorite budget proposal, because people ask me, where would you cut? It was massive. What's the current government budget? 1.3 trillion or something? I mean, look recently, it keeps going up. But at any rate, my favorite answer is, look, take any past year you're interested in and say, look, be very moderate about it, so it won't shock everybody. Let's take the last Carter year, free spending Carter. Had about $50 billion deficit, had about $500 billion expenditure. Let's go back to that. Let's pass a law. And from now on, no federal agency can spend any more than they did in 1979, 1980, period. If it's a new agency, they can't spend anything. Right? It's very simple. I mean, I think if people were out starving in the streets in 1980, they're in fairly good shape. No worse shape than we are now. Let's do that. Let's start with that. Then we have a big surplus. We can pay off lots of the debt. We can cut taxes. That's the way to do it. The idea is the drastic cuts in government spending. Just go back, instead of having to wrangle with various bureaucrats, we cut this agency and that, just go back to 1980. So, I mean, 1980 is fairly reasonable. I would prefer going back to 1780. You want to do that. That's too extreme. Let's go back to 1980. Start small. Okay? Seriously, that's a big problem. The only way I can see to do is cut/government spending. Yeah.
Right, so those of us who advocate for free market conduct, and your question, what about monopolies? If you have no regulation, then a monopoly will necessarily happen. That's a common question. Okay, exactly.
I think I've already answered it. The monopolies are created by the government. It's the government that creates the licensed plumbers, licensed photographers, and all the rest of it. The government that sets up cartels, that creates special contracts, that sets up. I mean, the regulatory commissions, for example, the Interstate Commerce Commission, are set up allegedly to help, because railroad freight rates are going up too high, and therefore we need a government to keep them low, in the public interest, make sure the big business monopoly doesn't hurt the consumer. The actual reason for it is just the opposite. Actually, what was happening before the ICC came in 1887, freight rates are going down all the time. Railroads are desperately trying to have a cartel and try to cut production and cut shipments and raise the rates. They couldn't do it in the free market. They turned to the government to do it. The ICC was a creature of the railroad, basically, to try to cartelize the system, to do what Bismarck did in Germany openly. Namely, you can't lower, you have to keep the rates up, you can't lower it, you can't increase your shipments. Have like we had an NRA, officially, just have a cartel. But they couldn't get away with that. They couldn't tell the public, look, we have to have a cartel in order to raise freight rates. They said, we're doing it in order to curb big business monopoly. That was a big shell game, which was then repeated in every major legislation since then. The Progressive era, the New Deal, more or less the same thing. The New Deal, more stuff comes into the picture. But basically it's the same sort of thing. Just for example, when I was, before about, I forget now when I came, the heroic, Louis Brandeis, one of the most revered figures in 20th century American intellectuals. Okay? His official biographer, the title of his book was The Fighter for Freedom, Louis Brandeis. It's sort of a value-neutral term, right? This guy is supposed to be a great believer in free competition. What he actually was a believer in retail store monopoly. He hated the consumer. He called the consumer evil and traitorous if you left one retail store and go to another retail store. He was the father of the resale price maintenance, of the so-called Fair Trade Act, which meant that the retail association could set a minimum price and nobody could discount it on a penalty of going to jail. This existed until 1960s, I think, when Masters and Masters and Corvette broke it. They had a constitutional fight. They went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. It was restricting this restraint of trade, which indeed it was. So the point is that these are minimum price controls, which are imposed, cartelized by the government, in the name of helping out freedom and free competition and all that. So government doesn't do anything to promote competition. What it does is create monopolies of its favorite people. almost all the antitrust suits now by one corporation trying to shaft the other one who's better at free market competition. So you turn to the government and say, this guy's unfair. His price is too low, his price is too high, his price is too equal. Whichever it is, you find some kind of phony excuse and you try to use the government to break out your competitor.
What about the cable debate going on right now?
I'm not the complex thing of the cable. The thing about the cable was the two different aspects. One is regulation of cable rates, and two is the fact that in most cities, cable has a monopoly franchise. So this cable bill re-regulates the prices but leaves the monopoly intact. Just the opposite. It should do just the opposite. It should not regulate prices and allow free competition in cable. There's also the whole fiber optic thing I don't know much about. Allow the telephones to engage in cable and sort of stuff. So the laws are still being restricted. But that's by the way, a friend of mine is a big politician, political campaign person in Tucson for many years, and he told me a great story about the local cable franchise is one of the big rackets in the country because you're fighting for the monopoly franchise. Who gets it? Which political machine gets it? The guy who owns the franchise in Vegas has been a long time, I shouldn't say mafia because it's not supposed to exist, but a long time mafioso type. At any rate, in Tucson, there was, 5 or 7, let's say 7 people on the city council. And it was a battle between 2 possible cable franchisees. Who gets the franchise? One city councilman suggested a secret ballot. They said, what do you mean secret ballot? Secret ballot's not national security of the state. What is it? You can't have a secret ballot. It turns out this guy was in the pay of both companies. And he didn't want either company to find out, whichever one he betrayed. George Washington Plunkett, the famous Tammany philosopher back in the late 19th century, George Washington Plunkett said, his definition of an honest politician is somebody who stays bought. Once you're bought, you don't betray the guy who bought you. I mean, the government is the source of monopoly. It's not the opponent of it. Yeah.
Dr. Rothbard, are there any doable solutions to the healthcare crisis we're in and the cost there?
Well, it's such a tremendous mess. Because one of Mises's great insights is, and this applies across the board, applies to family interference, everything else, is that first you see a problem. There's always a problem because we don't live in the Garden of Eden. There's problems all over the place. You see a problem, they call then you have a $2 million commission or something, financed by the Rockefeller Foundation to investigate the problem, and then you suggest the government have a massive program to combat it. Government has a massive program. At the end of the massive program, the problem is still there, if not worse, and 2 or 3 other problems have been created. And then the calls for government to step in and create, solve these other problems. You wind up with socialism. You have a cumulative intervention. That's what's happened in healthcare. I'm not an expert in healthcare systems. The point is, when I was growing up in the 1930s, we were much less affluent than we are now. Okay, nobody was worrying about affordable healthcare. Everybody could afford their doctor and their hospital and everything else. As a matter of fact, my family physician charged $2 for a office visit, $3 for a home visit. What's home visit? So those of you who are under 60, I've never heard of this. Okay? And the point is that the poor people went to clinics and they were treated free by the doctor. There was no problem with health insurance, no problem with affordable care. This, of course, is beyond correcting for inflation. Cheap, it was great. And then starts third-party health insurance and Medicare and all that, and we wind up with huge medical costs, which most people can't afford, and then the clients have to have socialized medicine altogether. Because we have a third-party medical insurance, which the demand curve goes up to infinity almost. In other words, if you say, I, the government, I, Medicare, I will pay any doctor bill, any hospital bill, they'll go skyrockets. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine, his wife had an operation, and he gets the bill, and said, what is this? How can it be so big? And they said, don't worry about it. If the insurance doesn't pay it, we'll cut it down about 1/10. The point is, the insurance, the taxpayer provides the unlimited demand, and then they start yapping about of course it's not affordable, and then they start talking about putting a cap on it. The whole thing is a total, absolute mess. The only way to get out of it is to eliminate the entire government intervention of medicine. It's really the only way. Can't even do it slowly, and do it fairly fast. Get it out. And and doctors tell me it's getting worse all the time. Government regulation is getting worse, and all the rest of it. It's inevitable. Once you subsidize medicine, then you're going to start regulating it. By the way, I remember the 1950s, when leftists were in favor of federal aid education, says, and the conservatives said, no, you have federal aid, there'll be controls over public schools and education. And leftists said, oh no, there'll never be control. We promise, we guarantee there'll be federal aid, but no control. Now, of course, everybody's being brainwashed all the time. Okay? So that's typical. Yeah.
Would you comment on the Michael Milken jump line situation?
Right. Yeah, that's also great. That's also an example of cumulative intervention. The that's also a very interesting case because what happened was that many corporations, especially the Eastern corporations, Northeastern establishment corporations, Rust Belt corporations, became inefficient. And their profits were falling and not innovating enough. And of course, the locus of economic influence began to shift to the Southwest and the Sun Belt and all that. And as a result, you have inefficient corporations. One weapon of stockholders is to get rid of the managers. What happens is takeover bids come in. In the old days, you have a quiet takeover bid. So, I want to take over this corporation. I talk to my buddies. And suddenly I announce, November the 5th, I announced, okay, I've got 51% of the stock. I announced stockholders meeting. That was the good old days. Takeovers were fast and efficient. You didn't need anything. So there's no arbitrageurs, no milk tax, no nothing. So the old line corporation didn't like that. I mean, essentially the Rockefeller and World Empire, the Eastern Seaboard, Morgan times, they didn't like it. So they got Senator Williams, who was a deeply beloved figure. I don't know if anybody here remembers Senator Harrison Williams, Democrat of New Jersey. I used to read the congressional record. I don't know, I must be a masochist. One or 2 years, I actually subscribed to the congressional record. I could get this thing every day. And Williams was the most beloved person in the New York Times, and the Arts Council, always getting money for the arts, and NEH, before the NEH, all that sort of stuff, sort of premature NEH type. And he passes a law, he gets the law passed. You get this, you can't do this anymore. You can't just have a takeover. When you want to take over a corporation, you have to stop at 5% and announce it, and then wait, I think 60 or 90 days before you do anything else. So of course, this means you alert everybody to the thing, everybody, email, blackmail, whatever it is, and they stop it, and the little arbitrators come in to bet which what's going to happen, and then it's more or less stopped the takeovers cold because of the Williams Act. At that point, in 1970, Michael Milken, a burst of financial genius, decided to get around the banks, to get around the Williams Act by financing takeovers to high-yield bonds, known as junk bonds to their enemies. I mean, it's like Cadillac's calling Volvo's junk. It's higher risk and by bearing higher interest. So at any rate, so what Milken did was get around the Rockefeller establishment types and was able to finance takeover bids they hated, and then they used the Bush administration, which was tied in with the Rockefellers, to smash them. Some of the jail on trumped-up charges for violating 250 SEC regulations. Nobody knows anyway. Talking about regulations, beautiful way of these are chicken regulations nobody cares about. They're not crimes, and yet, you ask the average person. It's really depressing. You ask the average person on the street. By the way, the thing on TV I hate more than anything else is asking the man on the street, "What do you think of the situation?" So, what do you think of this? What do you think of Michael Milken? They should throw away their keys and lock them up forever. They had $300 million fine, was it enough? And 10 years in jail. I mean, mass rapists, mass murderers don't get that. They get a tap on the wrist. I mean, look at the disproportion here, and you see this is the way that they see the rotten state of the political system. Anyway, that's my opinion. Okay. Yeah.
Our chief economist for one of the large mutual fund groups said a 3 months ago that no matter who was elected president, that was before Perot had dropped out that time, that the economic policies were fairly well set, and each one of them would follow what the policies were. Would you care to comment?
But the thing is, both parties are Keynesian. The Keynesians, probably all heard of Keynes. They're all Keynesians. Okay? There are different nuances of Keynesian. Some are a little more conservative, some are a little more liberal. It doesn't make much difference. It's sort of like, who do you prefer, Goering or Goebbels? I mean, it doesn't really, so they're all Keynesians. So their whole view of the world is Keynesian. So whichever party gets in, it's true, it'll be about the same. On the other hand, I think Clinton would be worse because they're left-wing Keynesians. So you have more government investment, more taxes, and the Bush thing. And then which you pick depends on temperament, you know. So, you favor lesser of two evils, you favor making it worse so it gets a reaction concept, and I'm beginning to distrust that. I mean, because usually you make it worse or you allow it to get worse, there is no reaction, it just gets worse. So I think the problem with that. By the way, when the income tax was first passed, people who favor the income tax were mostly classical liberals, mostly laissez-faire types, and their argument was, look, if you had an income tax which was visible to everybody, there'd be lower taxes because you can't see excise tax, you can't see sales taxes. Therefore, let's say visible people fight for lower taxes for the rest of history. It keeps going up all the time. So I tend to, other things equal, I tend to favor lesser of two evils. That's true. They're all Keynesians. Yeah.
I see your position as being rather aggressive, and maybe sometimes when the country seems to be a little deaf to the idea of reducing unnecessary regulation and cost, you have to sort of be a little bit loud to get their attention. But given what I perceive to be a fairly extreme position on your part, that you need to peel back all regulation, and regulation, I guess, being somewhat the details surrounding a law. And I don't believe you're proposing that we don't live under law, but
details of enforcement, administrative regulation.
So let's take just a simplistic example. Instead of being against regulation for increased costs, which is obvious, or increased government spending, which is obvious, how about to solve the core problem, that is, of misbehavior? For example, an industry that without regulation might pollute. What would be the solution to their, what would the natural forces be to keep a business or industry or some sort of organization from misbehaving?
Well, first there's laws against fraud, which covers a lot of the, doesn't cover pollution, covers a lot of the other stuff. You don't need extra laws against fraud. There are laws quite legitimate. Pollution is a separate question. Pollution is, what happened there is pollution is the attack on person and property. In other words, if you pour smoke into the street or whatever in some area, you're injuring the lungs of the people, you're injuring the crops and all that. What happened was that in the early 19th century, before the early 19th century, property rights were protected. That was the key to the law. You protect property rights. If somebody injures your property, you get an injunction out, or you make them compensate you. When locomotives first came in the 1830s and 40s, and they were chugging down the field, they were pouring smoke out, it was obvious what the pollution was. It was destroying the crops of the farmers. The farmers took the railroads to court. And the judges, instead of defending the property rights of the farmers, said as follows: look, we know it's interfering with property rights, it's too bad, but something higher than property rights is public policy. We've heard that before. And public policy demands we industrialized, we have railroads, and therefore nuts to you. Basically, they put slightly more legalese. In other words, the courts then systematically, from the 1830s on, favored riding roughshod and pollution over property owners. And so when you do that, you're going to get, you allow that for 100 years, you get a polluting technology. In other words, the way, of course, the Soviet Union is a major Polish communist government, tremendous polluters. They were the government. There's nothing that's checked them. But one of the examples I like to give is, supposing you have a house and a lawn, etc., and you're on a corner lot, and the trucks start crossing your lawn in order to get to, avoid the traffic tie-up. And if you take the guy to court, say, look, we're on injunction, you can't cross my lawn. The court says, look, traffic is more important than your blankety blank lawn, so we'll allow the trucks to do it. You're going to wind up 100 years of no lawns and lots of trucks crossing everything. So the problem is not technology, the problem is not capitalism, the problem is the government does not enforce property rights, which is what they're supposed to be doing. And that's I think, the point. The pollution point is, also the point is to privatize. The way to make sure the rivers don't get polluted is to privatize the rivers. To make sure the owner of the river makes sure it's not going to get polluted. So that's the point.
Thank you.